As I've said several times before, I love cartoons. Also, I'm a guy, so I love women. Most of the time, I'm not too picky when it comes to girls. I don't care about looks, it's the character that I care for. But from time to time, my ancestral love of women comes out and I can't help but to drool over good looking girls. Therefore, I love animated women.
Back in 2015, I discovered a little reviewer by the name of BenTheLooney. I was drawn to him because he used this really ugly MS Paint avatar that just seemed so out of touch, and it seemed very weird that someone would expect to be taken seriously with this sort of branding, I suppose. There are ways to have like a really ugly drawing as your branding, or a purposefully awful drawing as your branding. But this didn't seem like that. This really seemed like something that he thought he had put a lot of work into. For a little while, I expected to follow BenTheLooney as sort of a personal lolcow, someone who I wanted to watch grow and develop as a creator. Best case scenario, he actually does become like a pretty interesting reviewer with some nice insights, and I could kind of say I was there when he was just some shitty kid fucking around with cartoons. Worst case scenario, he just sort of disappears, but anything else in between, I would have found some modicum of entertainment. At least I thought I would. Then I actually just sort of got bored and unsubscribed from him like a month later. And I didn't hear anything else about him for a long time, until just a little while ago, I came across his thread on Kiwi Farms. Now, just because someone has a thread on Kiwi Farms doesn't mean they're worth talking about. In fact, most Kiwi Farm threads go nowhere, and there's actually quite a few people who are worth discussing whose threads are barren. There just isn't anyone to talk about anything. So I really wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I had hoped to see that he had become something more than just another reviewer or someone that Kiwi Farms posters kind of spurg about because his cartoon opinions are dumb. I had no fucking idea what I was getting into.
Those of you who have followed me for the longest time have been presented with this image of a good old country boy who is golly gee innocent that he didn't even want to swear in his own videos. What would you think if I told you I like to draw nudity? Nudity? Big deal. Every famous artist draws nude figures. It's just the natural human body after all. Now, what would you think if I told you I like to draw those same nude bodies having intercourse with each other? Oh my.
When I opened the first Ben video that I had seen in years, I was pretty amazed to see what I thought were just bare tits, like nipples and all. I really thought that's what I was looking at. I had no fucking idea what to make of it. I imagined he had somehow just slipped through the cracks in the system because he was such a small creator, or there was some weird loophole that he was exploiting where it was animated, so it didn't really count. Later on, I found out in the rest of the video that what he was actually drawing was like a woman wearing pasties, but when it wasn't colored in, it looked like barren tits. And that was the exact moment that I realized Ben had become something I never expected him to become, and that was a sex-crazed person. Now, maybe I should have expected this, because in hindsight, in my mind, Ben was a kid. I imagined him as 15, maybe 16, in high school, throwing himself into something, but without the proper tools to actually make anything worthwhile, and without the self-awareness to realize what he was making was trash. That's not true. As I later discovered, Ben was actually 4 years older than I was. He was born in 1992. When I found him, he was 22 years old using an MS Paint avatar. Now he's 26, 27, somewhere around there. In the interim from where I stopped paying attention to him and me rediscovering him, he had actually gone to an art college, but he had gone to a really shitty for-profit one that really just sucked up his money and then didn't really teach him much of anything. Although in some of Ben's videos, he outlines how he wasn't really a great student. He complains a lot about not needing certain classes that do actually seem useful for an artist, like color theory and image manipulation, but that's not really here or there. The core point here was that he got basically scammed, or rather his parents did. Ben doesn't actually have a job. I don't know if he's ever had a job other than one at McDonald's. I only know that because he mentioned how much he loves Mexicans because he learned to work with them.
And how can we forget Lori's boyfriend Bobby being Mexican? In an era where some people want to build a wall to keep Mexicans out, I welcome them with open arms. I had to know a lot about Mexican culture, working with a lot of Mexicans at McDonald's.
Which is fucking amazing.
Growing up in a strong Christian household, with balls bluer than Violet Beauregard after a trip to the chocolate factory, I wasn't allowed to look at any pictures that could be taken sexually. I can remember one instance when my mother gave me a stern talking to when she caught me just doing a Google search of women in bikinis. Pornography was just something I heard about in more adult cartoons I watched, like South Park, Futurama, or Family Guy, so me not being tech savvy had no idea how to view it. I also grew up around peers who watched porn sites freely and would constantly brag about how much they enjoyed it, while I just had to sit there and listen, curious about what all the hype was about. However, I had to please my hormones somehow, and my outlet for getting my sick kicks became cartoons.
Our culture's gone in some weird places over the last couple years, and it's something that I have noticed that I don't think anyone else has quite noticed. And that is that our culture has become oversexed. We, as an American society, are thirsty AF. And not in the way that we've always been. Americans have always loved sex, no matter how much the fundamentalists and the Puritans try to convince us otherwise. Americans love it. They love sex appeal, they always have, and they always will. But there's a very weird kind of, and I'm using this word very tenuously, a kind of entitlement for sex now. So like in the sexual revolution of the 60s, these people who were repressed were expressing feelings that they had been taught to be ashamed of for so long. And it really exploded into people naturally hooking up because they were able to explore how they actually felt with other people. And they were all sort of feeling it at once. I think people today expect that same thing to happen, except we're nowhere near as repressed as they were in the 50s. So now what you have are people who hide under the banner of sex positive and then get really upset when other people don't want to have sex with them because they don't take care of themselves. People who get really irate with you, who say you don't want to sleep with them because they're transsexual or because of their race, or you don't want to sleep with them because you're homophobic, or you don't want to sleep with them because you're transphobic, whereas you may just not like them. I've noticed that in an undercurrent of people who are upset that they're not getting any, but they realize how shitty that sounds, so they try to hide it in something else. Ben's change from just another reviewer into bizarre sex hound that he has become is largely because of this. And it's absolutely fucking fascinating. I never once thought this is where he was going to go. Even though, like I said, I probably should have, because that's kind of where our culture was heading. But Ben just seemed like a normal dude, just a dumb kid. And now he's bordering on quagmire levels of sexual... not necessarily no, it's frustration. I for a minute there, I was like, Quagmire is not frustrated, but Ben definitely is. And I think that'll become apparent pretty soon.
It was the best I can do in my situation. I wait for any episode involving my favorite female characters showing a little more skin. Whether it be swimsuits, bikinis, or even just wearing a smaller shirt that showed navel. That was enough to satisfy me. Not having access to the hardcore stuff also forced me to use my imagination. To use what little info I had about the human body to try to let my fantasies out in my head. This helped spark my imagination for the more lewd side of my creative mind. My first attempts at drawing seriously that didn't involve childhood doodles were drawings of my favorite cartoon characters in swimsuits. These drawings have been lost with time, but my point is that sexuality has always been a part of my interests in some form or another. I was a horny kid with a need to unleash my perverted fantasies in a creative way.
For the time, Ben, when he returns to YouTube, just sort of focuses his efforts on sort of little pseudo animations about his life. The kind of animations that are just keyframes. It's just like, here's an image, and then they kind of move around the screen. You've probably seen this shit. Every animated YouTuber has one or two of these. This real limited, stiff animation that you should pump out real fast because you're just trying to make something to make something. You can't actually make good quality animation by yourself on the timetable that YouTube expects. It just doesn't work that way. Pretty simple stuff, nothing particularly interesting. This whole era is where Ben reveals the most about his home life, but I honestly find it all really boring. I've watched most of these, but other than him being a beta about his roommates and complaining about them after the fact, really nothing that crazy there. What did get crazy was at a point, Ben stopped doing this. I think he stopped doing this in 2016, 2017. For a good chunk of time, at least a year though, Ben no longer bothered with animating during his videos. Instead, Ben would basically do what I do, where he would sit and he would read through an outline very stiffly and without much charisma, while in the background he had a time-lapse of something he was drawing. Well, what was he drawing? Well, he was drawing tits, or he was drawing naked women. Well, certainly, Dylan, he wasn't doing that every time. No, he was. I've watched at least a dozen, probably 24 of his videos, and every single one of them is just him drawing a mostly nude woman, usually very poorly. Some of Ben's art is atrocious. The first few times I saw it, I was like, it's okay, it's got like this style. Keep in mind, in my head, I was thinking Ben is like, maybe my age, and I was thinking, that's better than I can do. But he's significantly older than I am, and he had completed a college education. So this was not just some kid who went from MS Paint to actually drawing pretty well. This is someone with an education and life experience who's managed to not really improve in any significant way. I'll say this. Super fucking distracting when you're trying to watch a video and listen to a guy talk about his life, and the whole fucking time he's just drawing tits. And it's really fucking funny too. It's not funny on its own. What's really funny though is he has his like paper outline. It's like he has the rough sketch that he drew on paper that he scans into his computer, and then he goes into an art program and he writes over it with the exact same tools every single time. He doesn't ever really shade. He just uses the fill bucket like Andrew Dobson does. But you can see it. You can see how he draws breasts on the outline, and then you can watch him in real time make them bigger and try several times to make it look natural, and it never does. It's really fucking weird. Me and some friends sat through Ben's stuff and watched it a couple nights ago, and one of them refused to watch the videos because he didn't want anyone to walk into his room and see what he was looking at. It's that embarrassing. People will take Ben to task for this in his comments pretty often, actually, and Ben takes a very standard stance of like, I'm just exploring my sexuality. It's just a naked woman. What's there to be afraid about? Except Ben is a very childish man. He has a stunted emotional palate, which means most of the stuff that he watches is cartoons made for kids, which means most of the characters are kids, which means most of the stuff he's drawing are basically naked kids. not necessarily kids who look like kids, but the characters are kids. Some of that's kind of weird. Like, if you showed a picture of Misty from Pokemon to someone who didn't know, they wouldn't have said she was 10. They didn't make the character to look like that. So that's kind of a weird gray area. But then you look at some characters who look like children, who maybe aren't, but they look like them. There's one character from a show called We Bare Bears that he draws, and it's really uncomfortable because she looks 3 or 4. There's one really funny scene in one of his videos where you can see the reference picture of a character from like Hey Arnold, and then you see on his actual art program just these huge fucking tits. It's so weird, and it's all out of place, and I have no idea why he thought this was going to be a good idea.
I was taught that pornography was evil and no good comes of it. Yet, here were artists like Zone, Shadman, Girth, and Big Dead Alive who were making a living in an evil business with lots of good coming their way. It's then I decided, if they can do it, why can't I? Why do I draw lewd? Why not? It's my belief that humans are sexual creatures by nature.
Starting in June of 2017, Ben decided it was time to stop being just another rando who draws cheesecake on his channel to his meager subscriber base, and decided it was time to become a voice for the voiceless, the smut artists of the internet, who are unfairly treated. He decided to do this through a series called Artist Spotlight, a pretty basic series of YouTube videos where he goes over an artist and what he likes about them and what he doesn't like about them, except every single episode is about a porn artist to some degree. It's not an explicitly about pornographic artist, and honestly, it almost sounds interesting. I can see the appeal of wanting to know about the people who make this content. They often hide pretty deeply behind their anonymity, and I think discussing them and their work in a more critical view is an idea with potential. That's not what Ben does, and in fact, he couldn't have possibly started his video off worse, because he started his series with a video on Shadman. If you don't know who Shadman is an internet edgelord who has made quite the name for himself for his over-the-top, ugly-ass art. It's okay at times, I guess. I don't really give that much of a shit about Shadman's art, alright? There's way better artists you should be following than Shadman. But even if there weren't, Shadman's got a less than stellar reputation. It was 2 years ago now, Jesus Christ. Shadman was asked by someone on his Tumblr to draw art of Keemstar, a pretty awful dude on the internet, to draw art of his daughter, blowing some dude. Shadman responded to this with just lol on his Tumblr, but then on his Twitter he said that if Trump won the election he would do it. Well, of course, Trump won, and time came, and Shadman kind of ponied up. He also kind of didn't. He drew art of her, but it was just a picture of her and her dad together, like just hanging out. So that's a little creepy, but at the same time, like, he made out of it okay. What he also did that wasn't cool was a few months later, he drew art of a young YouTuber. I think she's like 11, Lieutenant Corbis. Of her sucking off microphones, one of which is just straight up coming. He just drew art of her in her fucking underwear. It's pretty far for a joke, I would say. You know, like when you're drawing characters from movies and video games, and they're like fucking dogs or dress up as Nazis. Maybe there's kind of a joke, just because of how absurd it is. But I think once you start bringing actual children into it, you kind of cross a line that maybe you shouldn't. That might be a little too far, Shadman. So, Shadman's kind of a piece of shit. How does Ben deal with this? Well, the first thing Ben does is sort of underplay it. He doesn't seem to understand the concepts of suggestion or the concepts of metaphor. So he'll show a clip from the image, and it's clearly a little girl jerking off to dudes, but instead of dicks, it's microphones. And then he goes like, it's just a girl holding some microphones, there's nothing actually pornographic there. He tries to argue as if we're in a court of law with very strict rules, and we're not allowed to feel a certain way if it's not explicitly this thing. That's not how it works. It doesn't change what it's supposed to be. Anyone who looks at the image can tell what it's supposed to be. What's made worse is that he crops the image to be less offensive. I thought about putting the full image in the video. I'm not going to do that because I don't want it saved on my computer, and I already have it in my search history. Although I do want to say that Shadman named the image Lieutenant Whorebitch. It's an 11, 12-year-old girl. So, you know, a little far, maybe. Maybe a little far to put up on your website where people come to jack off. That's another thing that's sort of underplayed about this, is you can kind of say, like, well, he's just doing it as a goof. But his website is a porn website. It's a website people go to masturbate. And in that context, pictures of children takes on kind of a different meaning. There's a different undertone there that's kind of fucked up. That set the tone for Ben's basically entire persona at this point. He completely reset who he was going to be from just another dude to just another dude with smut in the background to now an advocate for shitty porn artists who are shitty people. There's really no way around it, alright? Even if Shadman's a cool dude to hang out with, you can't really change things like him being... You can't really look past that, you know? It's just something you can't look past. I'm sure I'm harping on this point, but it's kind of a big fucking deal.
It baffles me that sex and porn is so taboo in a world where a photograph of a woman being hung from a tree and beaten by a man while innocent bystanders look on and do nothing to help her can go on to win Pulitzer Prizes, while a photo of a male and female commencing in the very act that created the same people who were offended by it is disgusting, and anyone who shows any signs of liking that kind of stuff is called a pervert, a sexist pig, a rape enabler, you name it.
I really anticipated having more to say about Ben because I spent quite a bit of time researching him. Me and some friends spent a few hours digging through him on his stream that you can't find anymore. But truth be told, while there's certainly a set amount to discuss, there's very little worth discussing. His art is bad, and there's a huge amount of it that's very cringe-inducing and frankly upsetting. It takes a lot to make me cringe nowadays, but Ben's art definitely does it. And I don't mean that in like the internet term of like it's bad. I mean like I was convulsing Fuck, I can't even talk straight. It really fucked with my head because of how bad it is. It's all very disturbing. But as intensely disturbing as I found it at the time, there's really just very little to discuss here because it's all so repetitive. Ben's thread on Kiwi Farms is about 70 pages now, and I'd be amazed if it makes it past 100. Because other than me, I'm frankly impressed anyone pays attention to him. His subscriber count is pretty low, and he's really a nobody. And while I found his art really entertaining, in hindsight, he's just not that interesting of a person. And there's really not much more to talk about here. I mean, it's not like he's gonna make a video where he draws himself in the nude and talks about Hitler. Right?
Happy Easter, everybody! And as my present to you, I'm going to bring back my critically acclaimed Artist Spotlight series. And today, we have a very obscure artist all the way from Austria in the early 1900s, whose art has been lost to time. Let me present to you the wonderful artwork of Adolf Hitler.
I masturbate at least once a day. Too personal?
I gotta pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.